New York Shirtwaist Strike of 1909. The New York Shirtwaist Strike of 1909, also known as the Uprising of the 20,000, was a labor strike primarily involving Jewish women working in New York shirtwaist factories. It was the largest strike by female American workers up to that date. Led by Clara Lemlich and the International Ladies' Garment Workers Union, and supported by the National Women's Trade Union League of America and NWTUL, the strike began in November 1909. In February 1910, the NWTUL settled with the factory owners, gaining improved wages, working conditions, and hours. The end of the strike was followed only a year later by the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, which exposed the plight of immigrant women working in dangerous and difficult conditions. History. Background. During the 20th century, American textile workers of all categories, and female textile workers in particular, were subjected to abysmal working conditions, marked by crowded, unsanitary facilities, long work days, and miserable wages. Production in the garment-making capital of New York City during the first decade of the century was split between 600 shops and factories, employing 30,000 workers and producing an estimated $50 million worth of merchandise annually. Women were frequently trapped by an internal subcontracting system, which made extensive use of homework and additionally limited entry into skilled operator. These so-called learners often earned no more than $3 or $4 a day, a small fraction of the typical wages of $7. At the top of the garment industry hierarchy were the skilled pattern makers and cutters, who were almost exclusively male. Garment industry workers often worked in small sweatshops. Work weeks of 65 hours were normal, and in season they might expand. Despite their meager wages, workers were often required to supply their own basic materials, including needles, thread, and sewing machines. Workers could be fined for being late for work or for damaging a garment they were working on. At some work sites, such as the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, steel doors were used to lock in workers so as to prevent workers from taking breaks. And as a result, women had to ask permission from supervisors to use the restroom. The industry was dominated by immigrant workers, including prominently Yiddish-speaking Jews, about half of the total, and Italians, who comprised another one-third. About 70% of the workforce was female, about half of whom were under 20 years old. In the production of shirtwaists, blouses in particular, the workforce was nearly all Jewish women. Some of them had belonged to labor unions in Europe before their immigration. Many of the Jewish women in particular had been members of the Bund. Thus, they were no strangers to organized labor or to its tactics. Indeed, Jewish women who worked in the garment industry were among the most vocal and active supporters of women's suffrage in New York. Strike. In September 1909, employees at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory went on strike. On November 22, 1909, a meeting was arranged at the Great Hall of Cooper Union, where Local 25 voted for a general strike. The meeting had been organized by International Ladies' Garment Workers Union. In attendance at the meeting was Clara Lemlich, a 23-year-old garment worker, originally from Ukraine. Lemlich was already on strike, and she had been hospitalized after hired thugs assaulted her on the picket line. At the meeting, Lemlich had been listening to men speak about the disadvantages and cautions about the shirtwaist workers going on a general strike. After listening to these men speak for 4 or more hours, she rose and declared in Yiddish that she wanted to say a few words of her own. After rising to the podium, she declared that the shirtwaist workers would go on a general strike. She said, "I have no further patience for talk. I move we go on a general strike." Her declaration received a standing ovation, and the audience went wild. Clara then took an oath swearing that if she became a traitor to the cause she now voted for, then that the hand she now held high wither from her arm. On the 24th of November, less than 1 day after the strike had been declared, 15,000 shirtwaist workers walked out of the factories. With many of these women belonged to the Colony Club, an exclusive club that did not admit Jews, which made the alliance unexpected. Members of the Mink Brigade included in Tracy Morgan, the daughter of J.P. Morgan, and Alva Belmont, the former wife of William Kissam Vanderbilt. In 1908, Morgan had begun organizing a women's auxiliary group. Many of the demands of the workers had been met, including better pay, shorter hours, and equal treatment of workers who were in the union and workers who were not. However, Blank and Harris refused to make an agreement with the union, and they did not address key safety concerns such as locked doors and condemned fire escapes in the workplace. Legacy. The successful strike marked an important benchmark for the American labor movement and especially for garment industry unions. The strike helped transform industrial worker culture and activism in the United States. However, the triumph of the strike was later overshadowed by the tragedy of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in March 1911. The strike inspired Clara Zetkin to propose an International Women's Day, which was first celebrated by the Socialist Party of America